Hi, I'm Samuel Hollywood Summers. I'm a sound designer and composer based in Exeter in the United Kingdom, and I'm currently working on a project called Emotional Response, a generative piece of music that's going to be interactive with the audience, responding to their emotional states, or at least how they express those facially, and interact with the camera. So if you are not aware of what this project is, you can find out more by starting at the beginning of this vlog. There's a playlist linked down below. If you're already up to speed, then let's go over what we're going to do today. I'm approaching each of the 7 emotions that I'm looking at separately, and today we're approaching the first of these, which is disgust. I've identified this as potentially the most difficult in order to evoke, because disgust really is quite rooted in both smell, taste, visuals, and perhaps less so auditory senses, so perhaps less based around the sort of things that we hear. It is advantageous to humans to have a disgust response, and it generally keeps them protected against things like disease, around eating unhealthy food, touching things that are likely to be infected with bacteria or viruses or similar, and so it's a really useful response. So the sort of sounds that might accompany those scenes, I'm going to involve them as well. Now today the focus is on creating the musical instruments, the sound design, and collecting the samples that will then be put together to make musical gestures and put into that FMOD generative music system. Today we're collecting those sounds, we're editing them, and we're designing the sort of sounds that I want to be used in those musical gestures. I went to the internet to ask people on social media what sounds they find disgusting. I do plan on using my own sort of preferences, my own perception here, but in order to make sure that they're a bit more universal, I wanted to make sure that if there are patterns of sounds that are consistently coming up as evoking disgust, that people find disgusting, to use those. On Reddit, I made 2 posts. One of them was in a generative art subreddit. So here is people interested in generative music, generative visual arts, generative moving image, this kind of thing. One of these responses here is that the only thing that comes to mind for me are those wet, splattering poop type sounds. Not sure how else to describe what I mean. Like when kids put their hands together against their mouths and make farting, bleeping sounds. So, can I even do this? There we go. Need sweatier hands, really. And my wife hates slurping, wet, smacking mouth sounds. Think saliva being swished around. I don't know, that kind of thing. Nails on a chalkboard. Nails on a chalkboard came up a few times. Something called mukbang, which is where you watch people eating. Just the sound of other people eating, those sort of wet mouth sounds, swallowing, especially eating with your mouth open, this kind of thing. The sound of 2 glasses being rubbed together, that'll be interesting to look at. Stirring macaroni, and again I think it's that kind of gloopy, wet, sort of sloppy kind of a sound. I already had in mind that I wanted to use these. I'm assuming here this is like macaroni and cheese. Reddit's big in America. I think I could do that with something like baked beans, soup, anything that's got that sort of gloppy, gloopy kind of texture. We can get some interesting sounds from that. A very vivid description here of picking up a dead mouldy rat. I think here it's the situation more than the sound that's going to evoke disgust. I think any sound that can imply these other things will have the same effect. There's something that we call acousmatic sound. Those of us interested in sound design, this kind of thing. Acousmatic sound is any sound where you hear it but you don't see the source of the sound. The source of the sound isn't made known to you. And I think that ambiguity of origin of sounds that might be, for example, from an injured body, from a process that we know is either dangerous or can impact your health, sounds that might be associated with bodily function, the kind of activity that people also find disgusting. So whether that's to do with going to the toilet, feces, you know, there's health concerns there. A lot of people also experience disgust around sex, sexual intercourse and related behaviours there. So sounds that evoke that as well could evoke disgust. Also vomiting, dry heaving, vomiting. These are suggestions that I've got from various different sources here on Ask Reddit. Whenever I scratch anything with my fingernails, I involuntarily shudder. I think partly that's a tactile sensation, but the sort of sound that can evoke that sensation could be effective. Chalk or anything else squeaking on a blackboard, again, I think that a lot of the people watching would agree with that one. When someone blows their nose, again, it's a bodily function that involves bodily secretions, body fluids, unpleasant substances that also are associated with illness. I also got some suggestions that aren't really YouTube friendly. So I also went to Twitter, and I'm just going to ask you, follow me on Twitter because I got no responses. But yeah, it would be great if you would want to interact with me on Twitter. You can help with future segments of this process. So I'm going to be doing all the other emotions, so happiness, anger, sadness, etc. You can comment below with any sounds that you associate with any of the emotions, but I'll be putting out on my social media calls for contributions as and when I get to these other emotions. So through Facebook, I got the sound of polystyrene, particularly I think the squeaks that it makes as it rubs against other pieces of polystyrene, the sounds when you break it. Vomiting came up again. We discussed that there's a biological purpose, an evolutionary advantage to the disgust response, and the sound of vomiting, if somebody's vomiting, it could be because they've contracted an illness that might also be possible to contract as somebody exposed to the vomit. I don't really want to do a recording session of vomiting. I'm not going to make myself sick for the benefit of my art. Wet farts. Gross, I know. Sorry about that. The sounds of vomiting or bodily function from the other end with the specific tuned resonance of a toilet bowl and a bathroom. And maybe I could make a convolution reverb with an impulse response in a toilet in my bathroom. Retching, linked to vomiting. Splashes of muck hitting the floor. These general splat kind of sounds. Substances that go splat, a few of them are pretty disgusting. In the experience in the installation where you're going to be hearing that acousmatically, hearing the sound but not seeing its source, what your brain imagines is often worse than the reality, and this is how acousmatic sound can evoke an even more disgusting effect than something very literal. It's also why in films and so on, where you have Foley design, if you're watching a horror sequence where somebody's having a bone broken and so on and so forth, it's probably just bits of vegetables being manipulated and broken apart in the Foley studio. I'll probably do a bit of that as well, trying to create sounds that sound like they could have quite a disgusting origin, but without actually having to rely on being sick, on breaking my arm, on recording myself making a wet fart. You know, not going to do that. Other suggestions from Instagram. Food that squeaks like green beans. Nails on a chalkboard came up again. A baby crying. I think this is more something that feels unpleasant and maybe a bit repulsive. A sound that you don't really want to be around, or a sound that you want to bring to a stop, rather than being something that evokes disgust in the same way that a bodily function would. Sellotape being stretched out. This is from one of my sound designer friends. So they're thinking rather than a disgusting event that has a sound associated with it, a sound that can feel disgusting in and of itself. Cutlery on porcelain or cutlery on teeth as people are eating. A lot of people find that very unpleasant. And police sirens. Now, I don't know if the person who suggested this is morally objecting to the police, or if it's just that it's that really sort of abrasive, unpleasant, dissonant sound. I mean, it's made that way to get people's attention so that they know to get out of the way, but that could also be seen as unpleasant and disgusting. The rumbling of the belly, gurgles, often these are associated with gastrointestinal distress, illness, gone off food poisoning, and then the other disgusting things that result, the vomiting, the diarrhea. One of the greatest ways of evoking disgust, I think, is if you have a sound that implies a disgusting process without explicitly showing it. The brain and the imagination can run wild and often create imagery that is more disgusting than you could show someone. Horror films are often the most effective when they don't show whether it's the murderer, the creature, the monster. It's that build-up, that not knowing, the human mind being left to imagine the worst case scenario and deciding that the worst case scenario is probably what is there. I want to use sounds that are not completely 100% clear what they are, where they're coming from. I want the person listening to be able to imagine the worst case origin of this sound, and be disgusted by that. So my sister really hates baked beans, and so just for her, I'm going to start by recording the sound. I want these really gloppy, sloppy, gloopy sounds. I'm going to try and make them with a tin of baked beans. Okay, so I think it's time to make some juice. Try not to let this go to waste. I probably won't put the beans in it. Don't even really like celery. So I'll put with some orange juice, I think.
It's leaking.
It is leaking. Learn how to use your blender before using your blender. Oh! Bottoms up. It's chewy. Tastes really healthy. That was a small fraction of what we've got. This will be my diet for the next 4 or 5 days, I think. Cheers. Boiled up the rest of it, and it's just occurred to me that this is, of course, Foley water.